Chapter 26. Loose rocks and dirt crunched under the small group's feet as they walked towards the outer limits of desolation. The ground rippled with the heat and the wind carried small bits of dust. Each breath felt like it wanted to rip itself from the breather's lungs. Desolation, former home of the god of death. The group stopped just at the edge of the divide between the ruined city and the desert plains. Giant crumbling structures still stood. Monoliths of stone barely stood, fractured, falling, and looking like the perfect place for a tortured soul to live. Supposedly, this city was once one of the most thriving places in the entire world. People lived comfortable lives with plenty of food, no want for shelter, and friends abound. Once this fell, though, the people were punished for their refusal to believe in the hero's defection. Now it was transformed into the tortured facade of disgrace that stooped before them. "How long until nightfall?" Sarah asked. "About 2 hours of light are left," Roland said. "Let's go back then." Sarah turned around and started walking away from the city. Wait, just a minute," Cyrus called out. "What exactly do you mean by back?" "I don't care what she means by back. We're here, and we part," Sean said, continuing forward, his belongings gathered into a small sack strapped on his back. "Wait a minute," Roland said, echoing Cyrus. "Everybody just stop," he shouted. He paused for a moment to make sure everyone had at least stopped where they were. Sarah turned around, as did Sean. Sean, however, looked somewhat annoyed. "Listen, I really don't care what is going on," Sean said. "I am leaving. We have made it as far as I needed your help to reach." With that, he turned and walked away, clearly unwilling to stop again. "Good riddance," Roland muttered. "Sarah, what do you mean, go back?" 2 hours is probably enough time to make it through the city and find Dis's Manor," she explained patiently. "However, it could take longer. I doubt it will, but would you really like to be stuck in the middle of that city come nightfall?" Roland looked over at Cyrus, who simply shrugged his shoulders. "It's creepy, sure, but I can't see how it could be that bad." "And that," she replied, "is why neither of you are the leader. This is the former home of the god of death and destruction. Can you say you are certain there is nothing in there now to be concerned about, after all the shit we've seen over the last couple of weeks?" "You have a point," Cyrus said. "Okay, so we go back. Not home, you morons," she said, teasing the two boys. "We move back far enough to be able to keep a good eye on the city while we camp tonight. An hour back should be enough for us to see anything trying to surprise us. Early tomorrow we'll come back and continue." She turned and started to walk away again. After a few steps, she looked over her shoulder. "Get a move on." The two boys snapped into action, following closely on Sarah's heels. Sarah sat, her hands on Roland's head, clicking her tongue at him. Most people duck when they see a staff being swung at their head. "He was moving faster than I could see," Roland exclaimed. "How could I have possibly dodged him?" "If you had been paying attention, you would have been able to dodge easily," Cyrus commented from the other side of the fire. "I wasn't using any of my powers for that move. You just let yourself get distracted." "Yeah, well, let me crack your walnuts and see how well you keep your focus," Roland grumbled. Sarah couldn't help herself. She laughed openly at the memory of Roland's face as Cyrus' staff picked him up off the ground the hard way. "It's not funny," he muttered. Of course, this did nothing but make her life even harder. "I don't mind healing up your wounds, but how effective is this really, Cyrus?" she asked, feeling normal for the first time in days. "He is improving drastically." Sarah started to chuckle again, but Cyrus interjected. "Seriously, I only went a little easier on him than the first time we fought. Granted, I swapped out a few of the dirtier moves for some more direct ones, but he was taking me a lot more seriously and handled himself quite well. I would say he is just the place that I reached at about day 15. Sarah finished healing Roland and let him sit up. "Just day 15? He asked, rubbing his head. "Remember, no breaks, no sleep, no eating. That's a considerable chunk of time," Cyrus said. "Yeah, but I'm starting to understand why you were so doom and gloom when you first woke up," Roland said. "Just day 15? How the hell am I going to become even with you quick enough to be of any use in all of this?" "Just because you aren't as skilled as me in martial combat doesn't mean you are useless," Cyrus said. "You could probably hold your own with any common man, do pretty well against another scion, but a god will still kill both of us if we fought them on our own." Cyrus took a breath. "Keep in mind, day 15 would be 360 hours of training, which you've accomplished in a little over 10 hours. If we won't ever be able to beat Dis, why are we even training? Roland asked, feeling a little bit better. I said we could never win on our own. That doesn't mean we won't eventually be able to match him together, Cyrus replied. However, that isn't even our goal. We're going to let Felvar and the rest handle Dis. Our goal is simply to be able to survive and get away, which I believe you might be capable of already. We're doing all of this just to run away, Roland said incredulously. Sarah gave him a gentle rap on the head. Of course. Did you really get it into your head that we could challenge a god? She stood up and walked around the fire to sit next to Cyrus. Roland had noticed that whenever the chance presented itself over the last 2 days that she would put herself close to the smith. We've been set on a task. That is it. We'll do what we're supposed to do, return these items to Felvar, and go home. Hopefully where we can live the rest of our lives without ever seeing another damned god again. Sarah, Roland exclaimed. What? Sarah asked. What evidence have you seen that they are anything other than really strong, really mean people? Felvar is all right, but really pay attention to the way he acts the next time we are there. I think you'll find the experience a bit shallower than you first thought. No, I doubt it, Roland said. Felvar may be a bit over the top, but he was genuine. I believe in him. I have my doubts about the gods as well, Cyrus said. Roland simply looked at him agape. I had plenty of time to mull this over during some of the duller training. Why would they pick 3 children, and before you interrupt, we most certainly were children when we left, to do such an important task? Cyrus waited, seeing if either of the other 2 would respond. Sarah simply waited, and Roland finally shook his head. Why? Because it only matters if we succeed. If we don't, oh well, they'll send someone else to try again, Cyrus said. We mean truly little to them. We are expendable. I don't believe they would be that cold, Roland said. Honestly, Sarah said, in spite of my views on their personalities, I don't think they would be quite that cold either. Suit yourselves. It doesn't really matter what we think of them anyway. Our only choices are complete their task and risk being killed by Dis on the way, or try to hide from their task and risk being hunted down by any one of the rest. So, no matter what, we were stuck from the beginning. Cyrus remembered the look on Severin's face when he first heard the god's plan. He finally understood why the man was so upset. For the next hour, the 3 simply sat around the fire in silence. They chewed over leftover bits of food, watched the stars, poked around the fire, anything to try and ignore the whistle and groans the wind made as it blew through the nearby ruins. With each minute that passed, Roland felt more and more restless. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. Let's spar some more, he said to Cyrus. It's awfully late, Cyrus noted. I need to know what it's like to fight in the dark as well as light, Roland said. Besides, I can't take just sitting and listening to that sound anymore. Well, I did insist on training you, Cyrus said, clearly not wanting to move. Come on, Roland said, hopping to his feet. You can't be reverting back to being lazy that quickly. He smiled at his friend. Cyrus rolled his eyes and placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder to help him stand up. Fine, but we're going to restrict this to form exercises. We don't want to exhaust Sarah before our adventure tomorrow. Don't worry about me, Sarah said. I rather enjoy watching you 2 beat on each other. Or, really, watching you beat the tar out of Roland. Ha, ha, Roland said. Exactly, Sarah replied, smiling at her friend. Seriously, Cyrus said. If you want to go ahead and sleep, you can. We'll take first watch. You can have the last, and Roland and I will just sleep for 1 shift and train the rest. It's not really a watch if you aren't watching for anything, Sarah said. Suit yourself, Cyrus said. He walked over to their weapons and pulled out his staff and grabbed Roland's sword for him. He tossed the sword to Roland, and the 2 walked a few feet away from the fire. There they started to practice. Sarah watched the 2 for quite a while. The fire, orange light flickering in a steady rhythm, barely caught them at its edge. They were practicing standard motions. Swing, strike, block, parry, repeat. The steadiness of their motion started to lull her towards sleep, but each time she would start to nod, she would catch a glimpse of the ominous silhouette of the ruins behind them. The moonlit shadows seemed to slither and reach out like fingers, couldn't quite reach them. Each time she saw this, she would shiver and be wide awake again. In the end, none of them slept. Chapter 27. All around them the wind kept a continuous, eerie moan. No dust blew, The breeze barely touched them, but they could always hear it. Louder and louder the moans and whistles of the wind blowing through the ruined cityscape would grow, only for them to be met by the gentlest of breezes. Other times the sounds would shrink to barely a whisper just before they would have to dip their head down to push against the wind without being blinded by it. But nothing else stirred. The trip was eerie, nerve-wracking, but incredibly uneventful. Slowly the tense team started to relax. It appeared the dead city was well and truly dead. "I don't think we're going to encounter anything at all," Roland said. "Let's not drop our guard," Cyrus chided. "Just because nothing has happened yet doesn't mean nothing will continue to happen." Cyrus paused for just a moment at his own sentence. "If it is any consolation, I don't sense anything living around us," Sarah added. "That doesn't mean much. Not everything Dis uses is alive. At least not alive in a way that I am able to tell. And nothing here feels like that thing from the garrison." They continued to watch the landscape around them carefully, gazing into broken shop fronts, looking for shadows darting across open and empty windows, listening for the scrape of feet on stone, but nothing happened. Slowly their speed picked up. Slowly the tension that had been building melted away. Slowly they started to treat this as just another part of the trip. "Where exactly are we headed anyway?" Roland asked. Sarah sighed. "This is why you're not in charge. Felvar said to just walk straight through the city's main street, and we would go right to Dis's home. He claimed we wouldn't be able to miss it." "So, where is the main street?" Roland asked. Sarah simply stared at him for a moment. Cyrus started to chuckle. "We're on it, aren't we?" Roland blushed. "Yes." Sarah faced forward again. "Yes, we are." They continued this way for 2 hours. The city wasn't huge, but in several places the road became pitted and pocked with deep holes which they had to work their way around. At one point, they paused and debated trying to find a road that ran parallel to this one, but decided the risk of getting lost wasn't worth it. Even if they came out to the other side and found nothing, being outside the city before nightfall was their main objective. During the day, it was empty enough, but there was no reason to test out if the same held true in the dark. They noticed they seemed to be walking towards a clearing. Thinking they were reaching the end of the main part of the city, they started moving faster. This is how the sudden shift in the landscape caught them so off guard. They had found Ground Zero, the place where the gods' collective curse was cast against the city's residents and the region in general. The remains of the buildings here didn't just slump and crumble naturally, like age had worn them away. These buildings looked toppled. The ones closest to the city proper were missing their back halves. Beyond those, ruins and rubble were the majority, and with barely standing pieces scattered. Every piece showed some signs of charring, black streaks running like water sideways across them. Beyond all of this, though, dead ahead and surrounded by a shimmering light, was a house. This house looked as if nothing that had happened here had touched it. It was perfect. 2 stories, more windows than the 3 travelers thought any home could have, and each seemed to be lined with glass. A porch wrapped around the house, making it look warm and inviting. It was made of stone, but not every stone was the same color. The mixture of colors and the weird shimmering of the air around the house gave one the impression of staring at the rocks lining a riverbed through clear water. This was the home of the god of death. Was his home, before his descent. "Isn't there supposed to be some sort of guardian?" Roland asked. The 3 were standing just outside the point where the air started to shimmer. They remembered Felvar's warning about a magic-suppressing bubble around the house. He assured them it was safe to pass through, but no one seemed eager to be the first to try. "Yes, actually," Sarah replied. "I wonder where the creature is. It's supposed to disable the bubble for us." She fidgeted a bit. "I was hoping it would do so before we entered." "Well, it's doing us no good just standing here," Cyrus said. He placed his hand on the outside of the bubble. He felt a little resistance, and if he didn't press too hard, he could rest his hand flat on its surface. It tingled his palm, the sensation neither pleasant nor painful, but somehow alarming anyway. He pushed a bit harder and felt his hand start to slide through. As the bubble moved across his arm, the tingling started to spread up and around his body. "Look out!" Sarah yelled and dived to push Cyrus to the side. Just as she hit him, a melon-sized rock rushed through the air where his head had been. It landed with a boom behind them. Cyrus rolled to his feet and pulled Sarah to hers, putting himself between her and the bubble, searching wildly for whoever had thrown the rock. "Did you see where that came from, Roland?" Cyrus shouted. "No." Roland was scanning everywhere within the bubble as rapidly as Cyrus. "I can't sense anyone inside that thing," Sarah said. "I can't sense anything at all inside it, though. It's like there should literally be nothing in front of us." A large pile of rocks sat just a few feet away from the front door of the house. It had struck Cyrus as odd that such a beautiful sight would be marred by a pile of rocks. But it was the weird way they seemed to be quivering that drew his gaze there this time. "Did you see anything odd, Roland?" Cyrus asked, testing his student's observational skills. "You mean the quivering mass of rocks?" Roland said. "Yeah, and that is the direction I thought the stone came from." As they watched the massive stones, waiting for someone to pop out from behind them, the whole pile started to shake harder. Clicking and clacking noises started to fill the air as the rocks ground against each other, shaking harder with each passing moment. "Wait," Cyrus said, listening carefully. "The pile of rocks laughing?" he asked. Roland and Sarah both listened closely. There it was, the deep rumble of someone suppressing a laugh. "Quit mocking us and show yourself, coward," Roland shouted. Suddenly a giant hand of stone rose from the pile of rocks and started pushing the whole mass up. A booming laugh filled the air as a mammoth, man-like figure rose to its feet. The golem, clearly amused, had to stand doubled over to contain itself. Finally, it looked up at them. It started to walk over to where the three stood, causing them to back away from the bubble by a few feet. "Hold still," its deep voice boomed out, each word outlined by the grinding of rocks as its throat struggled to form the words. "I won't attack again, yet." It chuckled again as if it had made a small joke. Roland watched in awe as the monster approached. It didn't appear to be moving quickly, but it was so tall that each stride covered a yard or more. By the time it reached the bubble, they were literally standing in its shadow. The stones that made up its form were smooth, rounded in just the right places to suggest muscles. The resemblance it had to a human was unsettling, especially its eyes. Instead of a pair of rubies staring back, like Roland had expected, there were two clear, blue eyes. He had no idea what they were made of, but they looked strikingly like a regular pair of human eyes. "I sit around and wait for hundreds of years, not a single visitor," the monster grumbled. "When I finally have some company, what did they send me? Children." "We were sent by Felvar to retrieve the items hidden in this house," Roland said, trying to sound as regal as he thought he could. "You shouldn't have attacked us. Your master will be displeased." "Master?" the monster shouted. Its laughs were full-throated this time, the volume this near almost deafening. "My warden, you mean. He told us you were to allow us to gather the items he sent us for, the sword and the chest. Then you were to shut off the barrier." Roland tried to command. He felt himself faltering under the creature's gaze. "And why would I do that?" the golem asked. Roland's mouth opened and closed like a fish struggling to breathe. He had no reply to this. "Let me answer for you," the creature grumbled. "I won't. Why would I possibly shut off the barrier and kill myself?" This took all three of the youths aback. Felvar hadn't mentioned that shutting down the barrier would kill the Guardian. Not perturbed, Sarah spoke up. "For the good of humanity. Dis has returned and we need the weapons inside to defeat him." This seemed to take all the laughter out of the creature. "Dis has been freed?" it asked. "Yes," Cyrus spoke up. "The ceremony was ruined and he was freed from his prison. Now he is trying to eradicate the gods." The creature looked at the three youths one by one. "Go home, children," the creature said. "I will not let you pass. If you aren't trying to get in the way, Dis will leave you alone. You are too young for him to kill easily." The golem turned and started to walk away. "Hey," Cyrus shouted. "Hey, damn it. We came all this way, sacrificed more than our fair share. You will let us through, or I will make you." In the grips of anger, Cyrus pushed his way through the barrier without pause. Immediately he could sense the error of his haste. He went lightheaded for a moment, almost falling to his knees as his control over time was torn from him. He could still sense his link to the magic, but his ability to touch it was gone. "Petulant child." The monster turned and started back towards Cyrus. Seeing the way Cyrus reacted to his push through the bubble, Roland was more careful in his pursuit and able to handle the shock more readily. He rushed over to Cyrus and grabbed the smith, pulling him back towards the bubble. "No," Cyrus said, planting his feet firmly on the ground. His vision was settling, his grip on reality firming. "No," he shouted, stopping Roland. "We fight him. You distract him. Your sword can't cut, but my staff can smash some of the rocks off him without breaking." "Have you really looked at him?" Roland asked. "Besides, what can we do without our powers?" "We don't need them to fight him," Cyrus said, regaining his feet and starting to move forward. Sarah startled both of the boys. "I'll do better at distracting him than either of you," she said as she lifted her bow. "He'll want to protect those pretty eyes of his." She lifted an arrow from her quiver, knocked it, and drew back. Also, don't forget who is in charge, children. She let the arrow fly. Faster than they expected, the creature lifted a hand and blocked the arrow from contacting its face. How rude, the creature rumbled. I try to warn you off, fairly, and go to leave you alone, and what do? Shoot an arrow at my eye. I'll try not to kill you outright so that the medic can heal you after I throw your bodies back past the barrier. The golem moved faster than a creature made of stone had any right to do. Before the trio could process what was going on, it was standing directly in front of them preparing a large swing. The three scattered. The golem's fist left a crater where it struck. Dirt, dust, and rocks flew through the air, pelting the trio as they fought to regain their feet. Before she had fully recovered, the monster was standing beside Sarah. She saw its swing coming hard at her head and ducked just in time to avoid whatever damage it might have wrought. She danced backwards, dodging around swings that pelted the ground she was leaving in front of her, barely dodging each attack. Cyrus rammed into the creature's left side, knocking it off balance but quickly reminding him that it was made of stone. His shoulder throbbed where he had made contact. His left arm screamed against his attempts to lift it and work out the pain. The golem let out a roar and turned its focus on him. He dodged backwards as Sarah had. However, he prepared to land some strikes of his own with the staff. Patiently, he waited as the monster threw swing after swing. Then finally he saw it. His moment to strike at the creature's hand. He swung hard and fast, landing the metal end of his staff across the knuckles of the creature's left hand. The stone cracked, but the creature didn't even acknowledge the damage. He was so focused on the creature's left hand, he didn't notice its right coming in for a grab until he felt the vice-like grip lock around his ankle. Suddenly he was flying through the air, struggling to pick which direction was up and which was down. Roland came up behind the beast. He knew hacking at it with his sword was useless, so instead he left his sword in its scabbard and used the scabbard like a makeshift hammer. He swung hard at the golem's ankles, hoping to at least slow it down. He made contact, hard. The reverberations from the hit running up the sword almost made his hands go numb, but he managed to chip a piece out of the monster's ankle. The golem stumbled. It looked back at its leg and just shrugged when it saw the piece missing. As it started to walk forward, the stone that had been knocked free floated back to its leg and reattached. Roland simply stood still for a moment. How the hell can we beat this thing if it can heal so quickly? He thought to himself. He didn't get much time for further thought, though, as the creature ripped off a chunk of its own shoulder and tossed it at him. He didn't manage to get completely out of the way and took part of the blow to his hip. He was sent spinning to the ground, pain throbbing down his leg, but nothing broken. Suddenly Cyrus was between the golem and Roland, throwing hits with his cane across the creature's face, chest, arms, and hands. Each time he made contact, a few cracks would form. Roland noticed that these weren't healing. He guessed the beast had to actually think about repairing itself before it could. Now, he just needed to figure out how that would help. Cyrus was fully focused on his actions. Each swing had to be timed exactly right or he would take another hit from the monster. It didn't seem very skilled, but skill didn't matter quite as much in the face of nearly overwhelming power. All he seemed to be doing was making cracks, but the second he would knock away a piece of the creature, it would just pull that piece back and heal. Hell, it had even ripped off pieces of itself and used them as weapons before reattaching them. Slowly, he was trying to guide the creature back to the barrier. He was curious about something, but he needed to be closer before he could be sure. "We need to make it angry," Sarah said to Roland, popping up by his side. "One of these days I'm going to figure out how everyone keeps sneaking up on me." "Why?" he asked. "It isn't as accurate when it is mad," she said, before she took off in a sprint to get ahead of the monster. It was better than no plan at all, so Roland dashed towards the creature's back. He wouldn't be of much use up front, but he could start trying to drive cracks into the creature's legs. Once he caught up, he set to his self-appointed task and started carefully hitting each leg, lining it with small fractures. Cyrus felt the edge of the barrier against his back and stopped. Instead of pushing through, he flattened himself against it, waiting for the golem to close the gap between them. Once the creature was within arm's reach, just as he expected it to do, it took a swing at his head. Quickly he ducked down and rolled to the side, moving so that he could continue to dodge the beast as needed. When the golem's hand met the barrier, though, it let out a roar and clutched at its wrist. Two of its fingers had somehow been sheared off. Where its fist had contacted the barrier had eaten away at the creature's fist. Cyrus had hoped it wouldn't be able to pass through the barrier. He hadn't even considered that the barrier might hurt it. His moment of revelry didn't last too long, though, once he realized the creature now had a sharp hand with which to poke at him. He started to dodge again, ducking under one swing, jumping to keep it from sweeping his feet, to the left, to the right, constantly moving. To his disappointment, he could feel the strain already. He had hoped that he would have more stamina than this, but the real world was quickly starting to contrast with the training world. He had to come up with a plan fast, or he would run out of steam and get crushed. Just as he was dodging another punch, his foot hit a loose patch of soil and he slipped. The golem smiled, raising both fists above its head and clutching them together, preparing to smash Cyrus into pulp. Just as the beast started to swing its arms down, an arrow sprouted out of its right eye. The beast let out a roar unlike any of the others. Nothing so far had seemed to do more than frustrate it. Now it was clearly feeling pain. Carefully it grabbed the shaft of the arrow, hesitating, seeming undecided about how to handle this injury. Instead of jerking the arrow out, it simply decided to break off the shaft, letting it put off deciding what to do with the lodged head until later. It turned to face Sarah, who was already preparing with another knocked arrow. She let the arrow loose, aiming to take out its other eye. This time, however, the golem caught the arrow mid-flight. It crushed this arrow in its grip and started to pursue Sarah. She had no intention of letting it get close to her, however, so she turned and ran away as fast as she could. When she felt she'd gained enough space, she would knock an arrow and pause just long enough to let loose the shaft. After the third arrow, she decided she shouldn't stop anymore. The creature kept gaining on her each time. She had also noticed, though, that Roland was still doing something at the rear of the creature. Cyrus had noticed Roland as well, and after taking a moment to catch his breath, he jogged up to his friend. It didn't take anything but a moment's glance to notice how riddled the creature's legs had become with cracks. Somehow Roland had managed to line the entire lower half of the creature with tiny breaks and never actually broke off a chunk of either leg. "Ha!" Cyrus laughed. "You are amazing, my friend." "Well, thank you," Roland replied. "I'm not sure what I've done, but I figured if he wasn't going to stop me, I'd just do a little preparation in case we needed to stop him for a moment." "You've done more than that," Cyrus said, running off to the side. He shouted until he caught Sarah's attention, then started motioning her back towards the barrier. In her flight, she had been leading the creature away from it. Understanding his signals, she started to arc her path to lead the beast back towards the barrier. She paused long enough to shoot 3 arrows straight at the monster's face. In response, it ripped off a part of its shoulder and threw it at her fast enough to make a small crater in the ground where she had been standing. She clearly had its full attention. The golem picked up speed, pushing itself to close the gap and finish off the pest that had taken its eye. Each step it took covered as much space as 3 of Sarah's. Soon, it was just 2 yards behind her. It reached out, intending to grab her as soon as she was close enough, planning to rip her to pieces despite its pledge to try not to kill any of them. Just before its outstretched hand could hook the quiver strap crossing her back, Sarah burst through the barrier. It took all of the golem's strength to halt itself before it tumbled headfirst into death. It didn't take all of Cyrus's strength, though, to start breaking its legs. Before the golem had fully regained its bearings, he started shattering its legs from the knee up. "Roland, grab the chunks and throw them through the barrier," he shouted. "Why?" Roland asked. "Just do it," Cyrus snapped back. As ordered, Roland would grab every piece that broke off the golem and throw it at the barrier. With the first piece, he understood what was going on. As soon as it touched the barrier, it seemed to disintegrate. With its legs literally broken beneath it, the golem crumbled to the ground. It tried to focus on healing the breaks, but no sooner would a piece reattach than Cyrus would break off another. It tried to swing at the young man to interrupt him, but even working to break the golem to pieces, Cyrus deftly dodged each of the golem's swings. The lower half of its body gone, the golem used its arms to lift up its torso and started to move around. No sooner had it gotten the hang of this, though, when Cyrus finished breaking the already wounded hand off its left arm. This sent the thing tumbling back to the ground. "Stop trying to heal," Cyrus told the golem. "Stop trying to kill me," the golem responded. Both paused. Cyrus breathing heavily, the golem seeming unperturbed. "You were the one that started this," Sarah huffed out as she finished jogging over to Cyrus. "Technically, I was doing my job. I'm not supposed to let anyone in," the golem replied. "We were sent by Felvar," Roland said incredulously. "They told me not to let anyone in. Anyone," the golem replied. "There would be no exceptions. He sent you to a battle, even if he didn't admit it." "He's wasting time so he can regenerate," Cyrus said, moving towards the creature. "We should finish this and move on." "Go ahead," the golem replied. "Cyrus, no," Sarah said. "He's supposed to turn off the barrier. Felvar told us it needed to be shut down." "We can figure out how to shut it down." Cyrus lifted his staff and started breaking pieces off the golem's already wounded arm. Sure you can," the golem said, no more worried now than before. "Just tell me one thing. How do machines work?" "It doesn't matter," Cyrus said, chipping more pieces off. "Just as I thought. You don't even know what is creating this little prison," the golem said. "You don't even know what to look for. This place is a lot bigger than it looks. Good luck finding the right device and figuring out how it works. Stop, Cyrus. That's an order, Sarah said, authority ringing in her words. Cyrus turned to look at Sarah, frustration written on his face. Sure, let's let him have a second go. We did so well against him the first time, I'd love to do it all over again. Wonderful time to relearn sarcasm, Sarah said. She stepped closer to Cyrus and whispered, Look at his waist. Just watch it a moment. Cyrus turned and started looking at the creature's waist. He had no idea what she wanted him to see. There didn't seem to be anything peculiar happening. What am I looking for? Does he seem to be reforming? She asked. He paused a moment longer, watching closely. Not really. Some of the damage may have been repaired, but he doesn't seem to be growing his legs back as fast as he would have before. The stones were always within the barrier when we heard him before. They've been destroyed now, she said. Cyrus turned and walked over to the golem. You can't heal from what we just did to you, he said. Roland caught on quickly to what Sarah and Cyrus had been discussing. Of course I can, the golem said, sounding a little frustrated. Roland laughed. It's true, isn't it? That's the same tone I always used when I got caught in a lie. I'm not lying, the golem said. I never said how quickly I'm healing. Roland turned and started walking towards the front door of the house. Where are you going? Cyrus asked. To start looking, Roland replied. If he can't heal, or if he's being honest and it's going to take a long time, there's no use in killing him. We can try and get information out of him about the barrier later. For now, we should start looking for some of the items we were sent to find. He's right, Sarah said and started walking to join up with him. The golem grinned and looked up at Cyrus. Aren't you going to join your friends? They never said I couldn't kill you, Cyrus said, eyes locked with the golem. Just that it would be a waste of time. The way I see it, if they are already searching inside, then it would only be a minor waste of time. Cyrus took a large swing and broke off the rest of the golem's injured arm. He stooped down and picked up the biggest chunks and casually tossed them through the barrier. I see no reason to stop. He bent down and grabbed another stone to toss before turning back to the golem again. However, I would say they will be a little upset with me if I do. I don't think they want to kill you. For your own sake, you should think about what I've said. They may be willing to let you live, but to me, we are far better off if you are dead. You are less of a risk. I don't like risking their lives out of sympathy. He turned to walk towards the house and shouted to his friends. I'm going to scout around the outside for a bit, see if there are any other openings we should know about, or if I can see this machine the thing was talking about. Roland gave Cyrus a thumbs up. Then he and Sarah went inside. As Cyrus started to walk around the corner of the house, he heard the golem call out to him. What do you want? He shouted back. You should hurry, the golem said. If you 3 children are already here, Dis can't be far behind. I was never even a tenth of the fighter he was, and if you plan on standing in his way, you will have to fight him. So, if I were you, I wouldn't dally long. Cyrus looked at the creature for a moment longer. Something about it seemed far more human than it should. He didn't trust the creature, but it had a point. He turned back to his task, but with a renewed sense of urgency. Chapter 28. The fog parted and heat poured in from every direction. Suddenly, all around them, the baked earth of a desert spread off into the distance, except behind and in front. Behind them was a city, ruined and broken from some distant conflict. Ahead of them was a house that shimmered, but somehow seemed untouched by time. It's been so long, Dis said. Yet it still looks exactly the same. He smiled and walked towards the energy field he knew was causing the ripple. This place, Lyra whispered. It's amazing. Is this your home? Was, is, will be again, Dis said. Well, my home is not quite correct. It is our home. Lyra's smile grew wide. The house was so huge to her. It could easily fit 7 people, if not more. Not only was it 2 stories, which was unheard of in Headshelm, it had a beautiful porch wrapping around the outside. Somehow, the ground in front of the house was still a lush green, but for some reason there were small, crater-like holes marking the yard. Right at the edge of the bubble there seemed to be a large pile of stones. Why are there holes in a pile of rocks in the yard? Lyra asked. That's a good question, Dis said, walking towards the pile of rocks. He paused for a moment, and for the first time looked around. The joy that had been plastered across his face slowly fell away. His eyes widened, his jaw slackened, and his eyes started to shimmer. I knew they had punished my people, but I didn't imagine this. Lyra turned around and really looked at the ruined city. It was clear that it had suffered some sort of blast from this side. Buildings were leaning and starting to fall into rubble. Something else clicked in her mind, and she realized that all the baked desert around her was probably at one time just as green as the lawn inside the bubble. The home had survived, but everything else about her father's city had died, and it had died violently. She walked over to Dis and placed a hand on his arm. "It's okay, Dad," she said. "You wouldn't know anyone's still alive today, anyway. Besides, we still have our home." She smiled at him. A few snakes of white slithered into Dis's hair, but he smiled down at her. "Of course." He turned back to the house. "This bubble keeps any magic that wasn't already present when it went up, out. Maybe, though, we can find a way to disable it without either of us having to venture in too far." "I'm hoping you won't do that, my friend," a deep, gravelly voice said from near Dis's feet. Dis looked down and discovered the remains of the golem lying just on the opposite side of the barrier. "Friend?" "I'm offended," the golem said. "Just because I've gained a few pounds and can't quite move like I used to doesn't mean you shouldn't recognize your best man." "Fathom?" Dis said, sounding shocked. "How?" "What can I say?" Fathom replied. "I tried to steal your sword while they were covering you in wood. They caught me, and ironically made me march it to the exact place I was planning on hiding it away in." He laughed for a moment, a deep, spiteful laugh. "I didn't plan on guarding it forever, but I guess that's what I get for trying to be clever." "Wait a second," Dis said. "They made you into a guardian? You were barely a decent scout. What the hell's name did they think you would be able to protect this place from?" Dis started to recover from his shock a bit and realized he was talking to a broken golem. "Speaking of which, what did you fail to guard this place from?" "A group of teenagers," Fathom said. "Two went inside to start looking around. One just went to walk the perimeter." "Were there three of them? 2 males and a female?" Dis asked. "Yes, actually," Fathom replied. "I'm not surprised you know who they are." "I was hoping I had successfully scared them off." Dis paused to consider the situation for a moment. His home was, despite how it might first seem, very large. There were a large number of rooms to be searched, and it would be relatively easy even without powers to sneak past 3 children. "Where did you stash my sword?" "Do you really need to ask?" Fathom replied. He didn't say anything for a moment until Dis's gauge managed to start making him fidget. "On the down display stand in your bedroom. Where else was I to stash the thing? You would never let anyone set it anywhere else in the place." The corner of Dis's mouth curled up. "Lyra, I need you to get the sword before they do. I doubt they could overcome me like they did my friend. However, stepping through the barrier would make me vulnerable. I've been teaching you how to sneak around throughout our travels, and there are many places you'll be able to hide inside even without your powers. This is why I haven't given you much, so you wouldn't yet be dependent on them." "No problem." Lyra was excited. He finally trusted her with something important. This wasn't just a secondary task that it didn't matter if she screwed it up. He needed her to succeed. "They won't have any idea what hit them." Now, Dis said. "No need to do anything to them. The Time Warden was a danger, so he had to go, but the rest are nothing. Just avoid them, slip in, grab the sword, and come back. My room is at the top of the first set of stairs you pass. Go down the hallway to the last room on the left." Fathom smiled. Dis couldn't be in much of a hurry, or he would have easily ordered her to just kill the others. Not out of cruelty, but necessity. Of course, the man Fathom had known was always somewhat soft towards children. "Okay," Lyra replied, a little relieved. She stepped up to the barrier and pressed herself through. Other than a little discomfort passing across her skin, she didn't feel much from passing through. She ran off towards the front door of the house. "Well, I guess we can chat for a bit," Dis said to Fathom. "What about the one wandering around outside?" Fathom asked. Suddenly the shadows seemed to coalesce around Dis. His image became fuzzy, even outright difficult to see. "Unless he walks right on top of you, he won't see me. So long as we aren't too loud, he shouldn't notice. Now, tell me how a bunch of children managed to kick an assassin-turned-rock monster's ass." The first thing that struck Roland about the house was the complete lack of dust. Everything, the wooden furniture, the cabinets, divans, stands, staircase, floors, walls, everything was shining. He couldn't imagine the golem crouching, crawling through the hallways of the house, polishing everything as he went. But he couldn't imagine any other way it had stayed this clean. "It's so..." he started to remark. "Clean," Sarah finished for him. "I guess that is an effect of whatever magic was worked over this place before it was sealed away." Magic. Of course it was magic, Roland thought to himself. Where do we start? Roland asked. With whatever the biggest room is, I guess, Sarah said. We're looking for a sword in a big box. Not exactly ample instructions. Belvar said we would recognize the box, Roland said. And the sword? Sarah asked. The man was a warrior hero of legend. I'm sure there's more than one. It should be obvious, Roland said matter-of-factly. Why? Sarah asked. It was empowered to be able to kill gods, Roland said, incredulous. And the gods would want that to stick out? Sarah asked. No, it won't be quite so obvious, or at least it won't if they have any sense. Severin did comment about how showy they always are, Roland replied. Sarah, with a shrug, conceded Roland's point. The two of them continued walking down the hallway until they reached a set of ornately carved double doors. Sarah turned the handle, and the door opened as easily as it must have when it was first hung. The room it connected to was immense, at least by village standards. It was a large living area, furnished with soft padded chairs, bookcases, throw rugs of maroon and cream hues, and a large fireplace. The ceiling was vaulted, which added to the feeling of size. Right across from the entrance, though, some of the furniture had clearly been moved to the side to make place for the strangest box Roland had ever seen. Well, that was easy, he said. Probably, Sarah said. We'll have to look around to be sure, but it does seem like we've found our box. The two ignored the rest of the room and walked over to the box. Various shades of red swirled around and around, through the lid and the sides, looking like clouds of blood flowing through glass. Roland cautiously extended a hand to feel its surface. It felt warm and oddly metallic, as if it were made of freshly forged metal that was yet to be polished. He didn't get any bad sensations from it like he did with the barrier, so he continued to run his hand across the surface. He could feel the crease between the top and the rest of the container clearly, but it wouldn't budge the slightest no matter how much pressure he applied. It is definitely tightly shut, he commented. Sarah just looked at him out of the corner of her eye as she ran her hands across its surface. Maybe it won't open until the barrier is dropped. Belvar did tell us to have his golem turn it off. Details, Roland said. You are a farmer. You know exactly how key details are, she chided. I guess we should look around some more, Roland said. Yes, but let's stick to the rooms directly connected with this one, at least until Cyrus joins us, she replied. Then we can branch off a bit further. We don't want him to have to waste time hunting for us. Roland nodded and headed to the closest door. It seemed simple by comparison to the double doors at the main entrance. It was plain wood, no fine polish, no ornate scroll work, just plain wood with a metal handle. He grasped the handle, turned, and pushed the door open. The room beyond held more weapons than Roland had even begun to imagine could be inside the house. Most of them were swords. By the gods, he sighed, starting at the closest rack and beginning a long chain of inspections. Lyra quietly closed the door behind her as she stepped into the house. She crept down the hall, careful to check her footing before letting her full weight down on the boards. Inch by inch, she slipped towards the open double doors, noting the set of stairs on her left that Dis had told her would lead to the room with the sword. Instead of being awed by the sight of such a beautiful home, she was focused fully on listening for other people. She knew her task and knew that eventually she would be able to come to know this place, so letting the sight suck her in would do her no good. She stopped by the open doors and listened. I guess we should look around some more, she heard Roland say. Yes, but let's stick to the rooms directly connected with this one. She stopped listening after that and slipped back to the stairway. Good. If they are staying down here, I just need to be careful not to make noise upstairs, she thought. She quickly learned that she didn't have to worry about squeaky boards. The whole house was in pristine condition. After the first 5 steps, she started moving a little more quickly, managing to climb the whole flight of stairs in just a few moments. With Cyrus still outside, Roland and Sarah focusing on the downstairs, she didn't have to worry about being spotted, so she didn't try to stay hidden. At the top of the steps, she followed another hallway down, past 2 doors, until she found the last one on the left. She opened this door and stepped into a bedroom. Despite her best efforts to block out being distracted by the house, suddenly finding herself in what was clearly her parents' bedroom succeeded where all the ornate woodwork of the entrance hall had not. Unlike the rest of the house, this room was simple. A 4-post bed just big enough for 2 adults sat in the corner of the room, opposite the door. It was covered in simple white sheets. The dresser and set of drawers that lined the nearby wall looked old and heavily used. There wasn't really anything else in terms of furniture to decorate the room. It was almost as if her parents had wanted to preserve something from more humble beginnings than the rest of the house's grandeur would suggest they ended with. She walked slowly around the room, looking at the paintings on the walls. Again, there weren't many, but they struck a chord in her. These weren't mere decoration. They were paintings of a man, woman, or both together with various backdrops. She stopped to look at a close-up painting of the woman. She had deep red hair and dark green eyes, fair skin, and a look of confidence. Is this my mother? She asked herself. It would make sense. The man was clearly a younger, happier version of Dis. In several of the pictures, he and the woman were clearly embracing. Lastly, the woman did share a striking resemblance to Lyra. She kept walking around the room, looking from painting to painting, wondering who had painted them and why they had picked the backgrounds they used. She was lost in her own world until she came across a closet and found the rack holding the sword. The sword was enough to steal her breath and pull her firmly back into reality. At first glance, it would pass like any other falchion. The hilt was simple, but well woven. The crossguard was clearly built simply to protect the user's hand. But the metal, that was what took her breath. The metal gave the impression of being filled with smoke. Blackness pulsed through it, but beyond the blackness there was a bright white. It was like clouds constantly moving past a full moon, moments of hopeful light revealed between shadows of doubt. There was no doubt in her mind that this was a source of power. As she extended her arm towards the hilt, preparing for the sword's weight, getting ready to remove it and be gone, she felt pain bloom across her back, so intense it took her breath, leaving her unable to even call out. The ghost wasn't lying when it said I could get my revenge on you if I were a patient, bitch. The vengeful voice of Sean whispered into her ear. She felt the knife pull out of her back, but instead of instantly collapsing like she would have the last time she saw him, she braced herself and spun, pulling out a dagger of her own. Sean wasn't prepared for this and caught the business edge of the blade across his face. God's damn it! He put his hand up to staunch the blood flowing from his cheek. She hadn't delivered a mortal wound, but she had seriously hurt him. Can't you just, for once, take what you deserve? He shouted at her. She didn't waste her breath or energy taunting him back. She was acutely aware that the others had to have heard him. That wasn't her biggest concern now, though. His first stab had done real damage. She could feel the blood flowing freely down her back, and she was already feeling dizzy. Her father was trapped beyond the barrier. She was stuck in a house filled with enemies, and the most dangerous one of them was right in front of her. She knew she couldn't escape and wasn't going to be rescued. She was going to die here, but not without a fight. She jumped forward and managed to land another cut across his arm, dodging his counterblow and sliding the blade deftly across his leg as she slipped past. He snarled and charged at her, showing less instinct than the bear she had fought before. She simply stepped to the side and tripped him. As she was walking forward to deliver a death blow to her murderer, her vision started to double, and she tripped over Sean's feet. She was going to die. She was going to die. But at least she had shown him that, without surprise, he wasn't a match for her. Sean rolled over and got to his feet, kicking Lyra in the stomach as soon as he had done so. It's time to teach you a lesson. He bent down and plunged the dagger into the other side of her back, piercing her remaining kidney. Through the pain, as she slipped towards unconsciousness, Lyra smiled.